Welcome back to another Reaper blog video. This is what's new in Reaper 6.75. And this is a big one, but it's lots of little things. It's basically like they took everything that they had saved for a rainy day and did it all at once. Lots of little things that are too small to prioritize in the usual update. But yeah, it adds up to a huge pile of features when done all at once. So let's get into it. So the changes in this update affect most areas of Reaper, but they're really little things, actions, options, swapping the order of buttons, and things like that. But then there are a couple other brand new features in here as well. This video is marked with chapters, so you can jump around to wherever you want. And if you missed any of the previous videos in the series, there will be a link to the playlist down below. Up first, actions. Add action to play, stop, and move edit cursor on stop. So if you saw my recent video on the SWS update, there was this new SWS function for play stop or play pause, obey, blah, blah, blah. The funny thing is there was never an action natively with Reaper for play and stop, move edit cursor on stop. I actually made a custom action long ago to do that. So this is great if you are used to more of a tape style workflow. So first I'll demonstrate the regular play stop function. So you press play, and when you press play again, it goes back to the edit cursor. So the original edit cursor position is retained wherever you stop. Now, this new one, play, stop, move edit cursor on stop, you need to assign that to the spacebar, which is a special key. We got it on spacebar, there we go. Override that. Now it will work like tape. So we press play and press stop. It moves the edit cursor to that new stopped position. Up next is a change to one of the defaults. Change snap to nearby media items to, by default, only snap to items on the same track as the current item. If we're like this, where we've got snap on and the grid lines off, when you drag an item, it's not going to snap to the item edges on the tracks nearby. But if it's on the same track, it will snap into place. At least the start of the item. If you right-click on the snap icon or the grid lines icon in the main toolbar, you'll get this window with all of the snap settings. And while I don't have a perfectly clean, brand new Reaper install here, I believe that this is the setting: snap media items to nearby media items up to 0 tracks away. So if you want that to work on nearby tracks, you just have to increase that number. Again, I don't know the exact default that is, but that's where you would change it. Let's say we have this on 2 tracks away. Now, if I have this media item here, I can snap to a nearby item edge like that, which is pretty useful when you're trimming items or moving them. So what's new with that is just that the default changed. There's a new preference: seek playback when clicking on media items. This is found in preferences/seeking. Let's go to preferences, go to audio, and then seeking. And in here, we've got media items when moving the edit cursor. So if we are clicking on a media item during playback, will the play cursor jump to that position? Having that off by default, I click on an item, my edit cursor changes, but that yellow play cursor does not jump to it. So what we expect to happen when we turn this on is that playback will jump. And it does. So that can be really useful if you're used to another DAW that has that sort of behavior, or if you just like that behavior in general. There are a couple changes that affect freezing. When freezing, preserve MIDI-only receives. When freezing to mono or stereo, preserve audio sidechain receives. So this is an interesting change that can really affect how freeze works. Hopefully it makes it a lot more intuitive, because often we would run into issues where we had something that was being triggered by an external signal, sidechain compression, something like that. And that receive from the external source would get lost. That signal wouldn't be coming in anymore after freezing. When we freeze a mono or stereo track and it has an external source coming from another track in Reaper on inputs 3 and 4, then those channels 3 and 4 will not be touched. So you can still do sidechain compression on there. You can freeze up to a certain insert slot without losing that sidechain input. And this works just a lot more predictably. Your sends aren't being lost in this freeze process, which is really cool. There wasn't really a great workaround for that before. Effects chain menu. Add menu item to cut effects, including automation. Mixer. Add cut menu item to effects context menu. Yeah, so this is super simple. In the effects chain, we can now cut selected effects, including automation. There used to only be copy. Now we can cut, including the automation, and paste that to another track, and you'll get those automation envelopes along with it. This is also in the right-click menu of the inserts area of the mixer. I have previously edited my menu, so I'm showing you here in the menu editor what that would look like. I can just drag that over and update my toolbar to get that new function in there. For grouping, reset automatic track grouping to default when creating new project. Respect group disable setting in action to duplicate items. And for a dynamic split, respect track edit grouping when splitting grouped items. In recent Reaper updates, we got many changes to track grouping, the automatic grouping of selected tracks, etc. And this is just catching some of the edge case sorts of things like duplicating and things like the dynamic split, just making sure that they all work together with these different modes and things. There are various changes to Reaper's IDE, Integrated Development Environment, the code editor, and I'll just briefly list some of them. Improve international keyboard support, improve home key behavior, improve behavior of panes and undo redo, and improve suggest list response to mouse movement. There are a couple others, but these are basically just kind of catching little weird things, just making things work more like expected. Things like when you're typing in and it's suggesting the thing, if your mouse doesn't move, it's not going to automatically select one of those things from the list as the list touches where the mouse is, that sort of thing. Just more things making it sure it works as expected. There are also many changes for JSFX. There are a few new memory functions. If tag's instrument is present in header, treat as an instrument. Improve manual editing of envelope points for parameters that have named values. Per sample and per automated block performance optimizations. Support log and exponential scaled sliders for controls. Support polynomial scaled fader scaling. Support up to 256 sliders per effects, longer parameter names, and very long lines. So this is basically stuff for the JSFX developers, making their plugins better, allowing them to do more within the JSFX environment. So things like the memory sums the product of length items of buff1 and buff2. If buff2 is exactly -1, then sums the squares of the items in buff2. You know, things that I don't understand, but useful things for the developers. The tags thing is really interesting because tags have been implemented in JSFX for a long time, as far as I know, but never actually implemented. And so this is the first step in actually implementing them, having a use for tags in JSFX. Basically, if JSFX is tagged in the code as an instrument, that should appear in the instruments list within Reaper's effects browser. So if you go right-click, insert virtual instrument on new track, you should start seeing JSFX being added to that list as the developers update. Right now on my system, I didn't find any that worked with, but yeah, that will be coming. For Rescript using EEL2, we now have the function of preprocessing. This is supported in Rescript, Video Processor, and JSFX. And there are two JSFX plugins updated to use the preprocessor. That's Super 8 and the Channel Mixer. There's a page in the SDK for what the preprocessor does. JSFX and Rescript EEL and Reaper 6.74 Plus support the EEL2 preprocessor, which allows generating EEL2 code at compile time. To make efficient JSFX and EEL2 code, it's often helpful to use named variables rather than memory. When using a lot of variables, it's often hard to write and maintain. The EEL2 preprocessor allows you to generate repetitive code dynamically. For an example of how this is used, you can look in the Super 8 plugin or in the Channel Mixer plugin. Yeah, this is just to make things more efficient, and it'll be interesting to see what things will take advantage of this new code. For the Media Explorer, add action to calculate peak volume for all media. We'll skip files that have already been calculated. Improve handling of RFX chain format and FX preset files. Support editing metadata via right-click menu for MIDI files. Improve behavior when pasting FX chain, FXB, and VST preset files into a track or item. In the Media Explorer, I've got an effects chains list here. I can go to my drum bus effects chain and I can drop that onto an item, and that gets added automatically to that selected track. I don't think I have any other preset formats other than the effects chains available, but you can drag and drop now onto, it looks like an item, but it will add it to a track, or if you drag it to an item, that will add the plugin to that particular item. So why would we manage presets through the Media Explorer instead of the effects browser? Well, the main thing is that the Media Explorer actually shows folders. So under effects chains here, I see that I have all my organized folders here, and then some that are not in a folder. But if I go to the effects browser and go to the effects chains, I just have this big list of effects chains. They're somewhat categorized, but there's a lot of scrolling involved. So it's not really the same sort of workflow, but they should work exactly the same. If you have those plugins selected, you should be able to just drag and drop those plugins to a track or to an item. Moving on to Razor edits, add action to enclose media items in separate Razor edit areas for each selected media item, rather than a single Razor edit enclosing all selected media items. Add mouse modifiers to move Razor edits without contents horizontally vertically on one axis only. Add option to move edit cursor on Razor edit change. Only copy fade in, fade out if the start end of the media item is included in the Razor edit. Support cut, copy, paste on project playwright envelope. So lots of good changes with Razor edits there. Let's start off with that action. In the action list, we'll find two actions. Two items here selected. I will use this action enclose media items, and that's going to put a Razor edit around the items individually, and I will reset that selection and use this other action enclose media items, including space between items. So I believe this is the older action, but they may have renamed it, and then this enclose media items is doing them separately. There are different use cases for that, especially when it is a selection like this, where there are items in between. We enclose media items, that's going to have a much different result than if we did including space between, because that is including items that we didn't originally want selected. Pretty good stuff. Okay, now let's look at those mouse modifiers. So back to preferences and go to editing behavior and mouse modifiers. For Razor edit area, the default action is to move areas. And in here, we also have on one axis only, horizontally and vertically. These are all new options here. We also have copying on one axis only, horizontally and vertically. So I'm actually going to just modify my default here to move area one axis only. And for command, I'm going to modify my copy to one axis only. So whatever direction I drag first, that's the direction that will be allowed to move. And I will close that. I'll make a Razor edit here by Alt right drag. And then if I move it to the left, it can move left and right, but it can't move up and down. If I move it down first, it can only move up and down, not left and right. And the same applies with copying. So if I hold down the Command key and drag, I can only move up and down, or I can move it left and right, but not up and down at the same time as left and right. You can set that up for horizontally only, vertically only, or one axis only. I think these are great things to apply to your default settings if this is something that you use all the time. One thing you may have noticed about Razor edits is that when you make a Razor edit, your edit cursor probably doesn't follow the new position of your edit, right? So if we go to preferences, there's now this new option here, move edit cursor on Razor edit change. Just apply that. And now if I make a Razor edit, my play cursor or my edit cursor will jump to that position. And I find that with this enabled, I can more easily audition those changes, make sure that I have my time selection or my razor edit selection in the right place. So I can even make another razor edit, and my last razor edit is going to be where the edit cursor goes to. There are a few nice additions that affect audio recording. For recording, fixed potential extra count-in measure being added with round to measure checked. For the routing window, display track parent names in routing dialog title. For routing matrix and track wiring, show if signal is present in audio and MIDI signals. So this is something that actually came up in a recent live stream. I was complaining about the metronome and one of the metronome functions here. There was a bug if you set this to count in before recording with a count in measure of 1, and you have this start measure, start count at start of measure, plus 1 bar of pre-roll before recording. And this would often just mess up. It would kind of start from a random place, or it wouldn't give you the count in properly. This is often my ideal situation. I've got a count in, so I got the timing. Then it pre-rolls, it plays 1 bar before I have to punch in, and then I'm recording. Yeah, this is just a weird thing that had bothered me for years. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. And it looks like they fixed it now. This is great. Now for the routing window changes, I've got a track here. Track number 1 is called bass. Track number 2 is a child of that track. It's within the folder. And in the title area of the routing window, we see parent track 1 bass. Yeah, so at a glance, we can see where this track is going to, what folder it's within. In the routing matrix, I think this is pretty cool. You can see these green lines here. This is actually showing right now faint levels of audio coming into those inputs. And if I tap on my guitar cable here, you can see that line input 1 is getting a strong signal there, and it lights up brighter. That's a great way of seeing where the signals are coming in at a glance here in the routing window. In the track wiring window, there's a similar thing. We can open up the record input section like this. And then again, if I tap on that cable, or, if there's actually somebody playing an instrument, you could see that there on the different inputs. It's a very simple thing, but I think this is going to make it a lot easier to use. And lastly, we're going to look at the new time stretching mode, which is called ReaReaRea, and it's a repeating, stuttering kind of effect. The really cool thing is that this one is actually tempo synced. So it's a time stretch algorithm that matches your project tempo. Very, very cool stuff. So let me import some tracks and we'll play with that. All right, so I imported a drum beat here that is at 86 beats per minute, and my project tempo is matched, so 86 beats per minute. If I take this and stretch it out, so it's twice as long, playing back at a rate of 0.5. This is using the default Elastic Pro algorithm, which generally sounds pretty good for most things, but stretching past about 0.75, I find it gets too sort of weird and grainy. But the ReaReaRea time stretch mode, the new one, is a lot different from that. So it's not really smearing things quite as much. It should be taking chunks and kind of repeating them. I'm doing this in project settings, which would apply to all items in the project, but this can also be done on items individually through the media item properties. So let's change this and try out the default of 48 milliseconds, randomize at 0, and shape set to sine. So it's kind of taking these 48 millisecond chunks and stuttering them, repeating them. Let's set the randomize to 50% and see how that sounds. And that's, yeah, a little more random. It's not quite so exact. It's taking, 25% earlier, 25% later, that sort of thing. But I think this is really interesting when we go to the tempo synced modes. So let's take a 16th note with randomize at 0 and play that. and it's a little more like an echo, which is a weird way to approach time stretching, I think. I haven't seen anything like this before, but apparently this is based on the simple windowed mode, and this is kind of like a variation of that, adding in that interesting tempo synced function. Let's take a half note with randomize at 68%. Kind of a mess, honestly. Okay, so here's a pad. Now this doesn't quite fit the project tempo, but I'm going to stretch this out to be 4 bars long, and this is a rate of about half. Yeah, it behaves a little bit strangely with a mode like this. You can see that the waveform doesn't quite match what you hear anymore, and certain like transient kind of things will sort of stutter. So that was a 1/28th note and 68% randomized. Let's do a longer fade of 520 milliseconds. Let's just see what that's like. I don't think that sounds too bad. Let's compare that to some of the other algorithms like Elastic Pro. And the rubber band. And the time stretch mode. Which is made for extreme time stretching. Sound touch. And the simple windowed fast. They all clearly have different sorts of effects on the tonality and artifacts that are introduced. None of them sound amazing on this particular source. Long story short, the interesting thing about the new mode is that it's tempo synced. But before we go, I should mention that these time stretch modes also affect certain plugins that use those time stretch modes, namely the repitch plugin and retune. Let's reset this play rate of this drum loop and loop it. Okay, that's how it sounds. And I'm going to change the algorithm here in repitch to the ReaReaRea mode. And then I'm going to adjust the shift range. Which I think is a pretty cool effect. You don't get formant control with this algorithm, unfortunately, but you do have that great tempo sync thing. Which almost becomes like a pitched delay in a way. I think it's pretty cool. Definitely experiment with that, and if you find something cool, some certain setting that sounds great or some application for it, let me know. I'd love to hear it. So that's it for this edition of What's New in Reaper. If you missed any previous videos, there's a link to the playlist down below, going all the way back to Reaper 5.0. This update seems like just they had a big list of little things that have piled up over time, and everything that they saved for a rainy day just kind of went into this update. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Support the Reaper blog through Patreon. Visit reaper.blog for more tutorials.